Hey you guys. So this next video, I'm actually going to address something that was part of a conversation I had with a good friend of mine, and they asked me specifically which journal do I prefer. Do I prefer lined, dotted, graph, cheap, expensive, whatever. And honestly, in researching bullet journaling, you're going to run across a lot of the very artistic, very aesthetically pleasing, what I call Pinterest and Instagram worthy journals. And then you're also going to find those who consider themselves minimalists. So I think I'm kind of in between. I do like a little decoration to show my creativity, but I also want it to be very functional. And I also don't want to spend a ton of time setting it up every week. I have learned some do's and don'ts along the way for me personally, and everybody's bullet journal journey is going to be different, but I did want to share mine because I have been changing things and working things and whatnot. And what I'm going to show you actually is how I plan to use this same type of journal. This is an Exceed journal, and it's the hardcover dotted journal, dotted book. Now, they do have one that says hardcover A5 bullet journal, and that one is a true A5 size. I think this is more like a A5 slim size. I do like the paper, being that it does not have a lot of bleed or ghosting with a lot of pens because this is 100 GSM. So it is a nice thick paper. It's a nice smooth paper. The journal itself is actually kind of yellow in color or cream in color, which is not my favorite, but it's something that I'm willing to sacrifice that part to go with the quality. There is a pocket in the back. However, honestly, at first I was using this pocket to put like my stencils and things like that in, but to be honest with you, I don't really have a preference whether it has a pocket or not. So I'm going to show you my weekly layout for my current week in my current journal, which is a lined journal. And then I will show you how that same layout looks in a dotted journal to basically see that there's really no difference with functionality. And then to add more to that, just so that people can really see a difference, I'm going to show you how I set up 3 of the same journal but with different types of pages. So we're going to see the same layout in a line journal, a graph journal, and a dotted journal. And again, addressing that first question as far as do I like a more expensive journal or a more budget-friendly journal? Honestly, these journals right here came from Michael, and I happened to catch these journals. They were on sale for like $1.37. You can do bullet journaling in any type of journal. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the time-lapse portion of this video and show you how I set up these 3 journals using the same week layout, and then I'm going to do the same thing with my journal that I'm currently using, and I'm going to mimic that layout in the blue journal. Okay, so as you can see, I have completed replicating my current Bujo in the what's going to be my new Bujo come the start of the new year, I did notice a few things differently. One, I noticed that the spacing, it seems like I guess the line spacing is a little smaller than a typical line. Like these lines are about 1/4 of an inch thick, as opposed to these lines, which were much smaller. So these lines were actually a little less than 1/4 of an inch, as opposed to these were exactly 1/4 of an inch. So that gave probably about 1 or 2 extra lines down at the bottom, which really threw me off when I was trying to do the spacing here, as you saw in the video. Another thing I noticed also, well, what I found is that I feel like I had more space in this one compared to the one with the lines, but I feel with the lines, I had more control over my writing, if that makes sense, because the lines are very prominent. Obviously, I'm used to writing on lines. Here, when I was doing my lettering and everything, I felt a little anxious. I felt like my lines weren't straight. I felt like I wasn't lining things up properly. As you can even see here, like some things I just felt didn't line up right, and it took a little getting used to. Now, what I did prefer over here compared to my current lined bullet journal is that when I was making these boxes, obviously it was a little easier to make them in the bullet journal because all I had to do was just trace out the dots. One big mistake I did with my current bullet journal is that I went ahead and pre-made all of my monthly layouts and all of my weeks. And that was a huge mistake, because what ends up happening every week when I go to make my weekly spread is I'm constantly having to cover up what I originally put. I decided to just start covering up some of the mistakes that I did, and it opened up my layouts really well. I do like this more functional style layout. It's almost like a running to-dos list. However, I did incorporate the Alistair method, which I find very useful because I'm not having to rewrite tasks that don't get done, because I can literally just track things, and then as things happen during the week, I start to add it in the color code for that month. So anything in color I added, and anything in black is what was previously scheduled based off of either my monthly log here or from my future log here. I think it works for me. I'm a type of person that had been searching for planners for a long time, and it seems like I would run across planners and I would like things about the planners, but I didn't fully like the planner as a whole. I can say ever since I started using this planner one, I'm more apt to use it because I personally made it. Like even when I got to a point where I felt like, I messed things up and I need to I need to fix my mistakes, I'm still more apt to use it because I made it. This is my personal planner. This is something that I created, and as I continue on, I start to evolve and I start to change things. I start to figure out what I like, what I don't like, and I like that journey. And every bullet journaler out there, every time I watch a craft video about bullet journaling, that's the number one thing each person says, is that it took them a few months to figure out what they liked, what they didn't like. The next part of this video is I'm going to take 3 of the same journals that have different types of paper layouts or paper grids, and I'm going to create the same spread in all 3. If you remember from one of my past videos, this is the teaching journal I had set up, and I had already set up a weekly spread in this teaching journal, and I am going to recreate this same weekly spread in the lined journal and also in the graph journal, and we will see how it turns out. Okay, so I have finished replicating the weekly spread from the teacher Bujo I had originally set up. Now, one thing I want to mention that I don't think I mentioned in the teacher Bujo setup is that this is like the bare bones setup. For the educators out there, you know how it is. Sometimes our weeks get very busy, so I wanted to create a weekly spread that I can do quickly, that I don't need to measure out and use rulers and things like that. Like I could just quickly draw. If I wanted to get more creative with this and add color and stickers and things like that, obviously I would. So I wanted to recreate this, and this is dot journal, so you can see the dots. And first I started with the graph journal, and when I recreated it in the graph, I noticed something immediately. So I had more space this way. It felt like I did, even though I measured it and they came out about the same length, but it just felt like this was longer for some reason. I don't know if it was because I was able to see the grids as opposed to here. The dots do show, but as I'm inking the page, I noticed that I don't pay attention to the dots as much. With the dots, I feel nervous that I'm not writing in a straight line. Now, mind you, in the lined journal, this page pretty much stayed the same distance. However, I was having to use measurements as opposed to box measurements, obviously, because there are no boxes in the lined journal. And then when we go to the other side, I find that the lines kind of are constricting because here, as you can see, I only have like 2 lines per day, and then my weekend is really shrunken down, as opposed to over here I can choose to write smaller or bigger or whatever. I kind of have a little bit more freedom, as opposed to here I kind of feel anchored to the lines. It really just boils down to preference and what do you see. Now, my overall opinion after doing all 3 as to which one would I use, it depends on what I'm going to use it for. If I'm strictly going off of this and I were to use it as my teaching bujo, then I probably would stick with the dot or the graph if I was going to use it for a teaching bujo. If I'm going to use this really just as a diary per se, then I probably would do the lines, because line journals to me are more diary or journal like. Even though my bullet journal for this year is a lined bullet journal, I found that many times I was a little constricted in what I was able to put in here. I felt a little restricted, I should say. Like I felt like I couldn't put in as much information as if I were to be able to do in a dotted journal. Like I think in a dotted bullet journal, I would have a little more freedom to write out a little bit more, do a little more with the layout, things like that. And lastly, with the grid, the biggest pro that I can say about the grid is that if you are trying to set up a bullet journal that you need measurements, you need like strict measurements. For example, if you are setting up a bullet journal to do like maybe some seating arrangement plans or things like that, like in a teaching bullet journal, then I probably would like the grid as opposed to the dot grid, because I'm able to quickly map out and evenly distribute things. So if anything, I probably would use my dot grid teaching bujo, and if I needed to make a seating chart, I probably would just cut one of these pages out, make it on there, and then just glue it into a page in my teaching bujo. And then this one I probably would just kind of keep as a diary or a reflection journal or something like that. So hopefully this was informative for you, and if you have any questions, definitely leave a comment below and I will address those questions and answer them at my earliest convenience. And I thank you for watching.